There's a JFK assassination conspiracy you probably don't know about. All these decades later, people continue to be fascinated with the assassination, and just recently the administration declassified thousands of new documents relating to it. But what I'm talking about had nothing to do with when he was actually killed. Someone actually planned to take his life years before he died in Dallas. Today on Deviant Off Script, we talk to the man who uncovers this story in amazing detail, author Brad Meltzer. Let's go. Okay, Brad, I have to say, first of all, thank you so much for being with us here on Deviant today. I'm very excited for you, not just because I'm a big fan of your work, but also your life. You are a inspiration for ruggedly handsome bald men everywhere.
I mean, really, we should change the podcast to just bald, handsome men for 1 hour.
I'm going to tell my partners after this that I'm starting my own company with Brad Meltzer, and it's all about...
That's right.
Yeah.
The BHM, bald, handsome men.
Exactly. And I look at my life, and I tend to be proud of a lot of the things I've accomplished, but I'm more proud of the things that you've accomplished. You've accomplished a lot. And, you know, we're going to talk about your book, which I'm a big history nerd, so I'm very excited to get into that. But, you know, just a little bit about your background. You're an author of fiction, nonfiction, comic books, amazing commencement speeches. You've hosted television shows. And just from a sort of a craftsmanship sort of perspective, how do you manage to focus on all these different things and execute on them well? I would love to know.
I can't possibly say the execute on it well part, right? That is not for me. I don't know if I ever do that. But I can tell you on the focus side, a friend of mine, Simon Sinek, knew one thing about me. He figured it out before I did. And he said, for me, the struggle matters. Mm. And what he meant by that, and what I've taken it to mean, is when I do something and someone says, hey, let's go do it again, I'm always like, well, we just did that. Like, I don't want to do it again. I just did it. But the moment someone says to me, you can't do that, that is just catnip to me. So when I first started doing children's books, my publisher, my longtime publisher I was with for 20 years, rejected the books. And I said to them, don't take the books unless you love them, only if you think they're going to be great. Don't just serve. I know you service a lot of authors because you got to service them. I don't want to be that author to you. Only if you love it, then you should buy the books. And they said, thank you for that. We don't love the books. And I was like, what do you mean? These are the best books. But they said, we just don't think that, we don't see it. You're a thriller writer, stay in your lane. Yeah. And then comic books, they were like, no one was writing comic books beside Kevin Smith. And they invited me to follow him on when he was writing Green Arrow. And this was when comics weren't cool. Now they, of course, are, but nobody cared about him then. And Kevin was there and they said, you're going to take over the number one book that we have, DC Comics said to me. You're going to fail on a big stage or succeed on a big stage. And I was like, well, people think I can. I'm going to do that. And I've just kind of every time, even the nonfiction, like the JFK book, those books were rejected by my publisher too. They said, we just don't see it. We don't think you can do nonfiction. You stick to your fiction. And I was just like, well, then watch this. And so for me, that focus is always about keeping it different and keeping it new. It's not a John Wick vendetta of writing. It's that I like doing different things. It's how I stay charged up. Mm-hmm. And if I just did thrillers for 25 years now, I would probably hate thrillers as much as if I said to you, what's your favorite genre? And you said, oh, I love independent film. I said, great. You can only watch independent films for the rest of your life. You'd eventually hate that thing you love. So for me, going out and trying new things allows me to fail more, but it also allows me to keep things new and different.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's another thing, bald geniuses have in common. Like there's a lot of things that we want to try and try well. And, I too, and I use the word genius for myself, but I too
I like how you did that. Really, that was impressive.
Thank you. I can left hand and right hand compliment myself at the same time. I get it when you say that, there's something about the challenge that someone telling you can't do this, or this is not what you're known for. This is not your lane. Like there's something invigorating about that. Like, oh yeah, and it's not it's more of a self challenge like than it is a show
Oh
them. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
and I don't go like in your face I did it
Yeah.
or not, because I don't even care. But I love the challenge. I
Mhm.
love the thing when I mean, I got 24 rejection letters on my first book. There were only 20 publishers, and I got 24 rejection letters.
Yeah, it's
I
impressive.
mean, some people wrote me twice to make sure I got the point, right? But I was just like, I was like, oh, then I'm gonna write that next book, and if they don't like that, I'm gonna write another. If they don't like that, I'm gonna write another. And again, it wasn't to be like, eat that. It was just that like I was so determined to try and
That's
get
what
over
you
that
wanted to
finish
do.
line.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the books you wrote, and let's dive into this because uh, again, I'm a history nerd, but I'm also a JFK nerd, and this is a story I didn't know too well. We're going to talk about the Kennedy assassination attempt, and it's not the one that most people listening to this or watching this will think of. It is the curious case of Richard Pavlik, and Brad's new book is all about this first assassination attempt of JFK, and it has nothing to do with Lee Harvey Oswald, E. Richard Hunt, the CIA, the mob, the FBI, grassy knolls, whatever you associate with the 1963 assassination. This is an assassination I find also fascinating because it happened before JFK was sworn in. It happened shortly after he was elected and before his inauguration. And it's one of those, I think, great what ifs. And Brad's book, I just finished it, is super, just like all Brad's books, very, very well written, taut, tense. What first attracted you to the story of Pavlik?
Just to set the stage so you know what's happening. It's Sunday morning. This is 3 years before Lee Harvey Oswald. 1960 Sunday morning. JFK is on his way to church. And what he doesn't know is that there's a retired postal worker named Richard Pavlik who's determined to kill him that morning. Packed his car with 7 sticks of dynamite. And Pavlik has followed him all the way. He's gone to see him in Massachusetts, and he's followed him all the way to Florida, to Palm Beach as his estate there, because he believes that in Florida that JFK's security is the weakest, which he's right about also. And as JFK is leaving the house, all this guy Richard Pavlik, this assassin, has to do is hit the little trigger device that he's built, and boom, is going to go to the dynamite. And I won't ruin what saves his life. It's an ironic thing. It has to do with Jackie of all people. But that to me was what we had at the start. Like I was just like, what is that? What is that story? And it just sounded a little bit crazy. But to really directly answer your question, I don't think I'd be doing this if it wasn't my own obsession with JFK, right? I mean, JFK was the first ultimate conspiracy I ever can remember, in my life. I remember my dad loved All the President's Men. Like back when HBO was just one movie a day, like we would watch that. But it was JFK that was always that. I remember sitting in high school, and my history teacher rolled in this a cart with a TV on it. And you know what that meant, right? That meant there was going to be a movie that day. And that's the great day, right? The assemblies and the movie days. And what she put on was this JFK conspiracy movie. And it wasn't one of those kooky, crazy ones that says everyone tried to kill him and their mother. But it was one of those ones that asked the questions that still have not been answered. What's Lee Harvey Oswald doing for months on end in Russia? And nobody knows anything about it, even though he's a former Marine. Like, what was Jack Ruby? How did he get so quickly into that police station? Why did he pull the trigger? And I just remember just going, what's this? So my honest answer to your question is it was just JFK himself that always has, he's that shiny object that gets taken from us. And boy, I feel like I've been chasing that shiny object. And then Pavlik's story was just so crazy that Josh mentioned who I co-wrote it with, we're just like, this is going to be a heck of a book if we can figure it out.
Yeah, and in your book, you paint a beautiful picture of the concept of Camelot and what JFK represented to a lot of people. But when it comes to Pavlik, it's those things that inspired other people, that concept of Camelot and what that meant to people that actually set him on the path towards wanting to kill Kennedy, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about why he wants to. So first of all, Pavlik hates Kennedy One, because he was from Massachusetts, lived in Massachusetts, and he just hated the Kennedys in general, thought that they bought their way into office. So that's one reason to hate him. I'm not sure it's a reason to kill him, but it's one reason he hates him. The reason he wants to kill him is because JFK is Catholic. And I know it's titillating for me to come on here and say, hey, we found a secret plot to kill JFK. No one knows about it. It's a real story. But Josh and I, when we take these stories on, we always try, history is not cool just because it's old stuff that's interesting. To me, history is best when it informs you about where we are today. And for me, if you look at the 1960 election, it's a moment where whoever you like, Nixon or Kennedy, it's divided down the center of the country. It's the closest election in the 20th century that they've ever had. And it is whatever side you're on, you think the other side are complete and utter morons. Does that sound familiar to you?
A little bit.
And so that's the setting. But the question is what else is happening in the world? And what's happening also is there's a whole lot of people that hate JFK because he's Catholic. And it sounds almost crazy and silly now, but back then you had amazing religious figures, leaders. You had the Reverend Norman Vincent Peale, the Reverend Billy Graham, right? Who are just determined that this Catholic cannot reach the White House because he's going to be loyal to the Pope and not loyal to the United States. And again, it sounds absurd now, but that was how the Protestant groups saw it back then.
I don't even know if it sounds so absurd right now because, this isn't a show about politics, but just from an objective standpoint, the American right and the place of prominence it's come to over the last couple of decades, that is a direct offshoot of exactly what you're describing, right? It started. People think it started in the 80s or with Ruby Ridge or with Waco. It started way before that.
No. Listen, there's always America's founded as a culture on we always hate other people, especially when we can find a good other. Sadly, I don't know if that's even it's just human nature, right? That's how people rally, and politicians want you angry for one reason, because angry people vote. Yeah. And cable news wants you angry for one reason, because angry people watch TV. The algorithm wants you angry because angry people scroll. Yeah. So whenever you see those things that make you angry, I'm always going like, well, why? Why is this? Who wants me angry? Who benefits here when I'm mad? And in that case, they were mad as hell that JFK was a Catholic. And why? Because it benefited them of him not winning, right? Yeah. It helps them. That's how they saw it. And the other part of that, just as separately, but also at the same time, is the resurgence of the KKK. Yeah, they also hate Catholics. They basically saw. We know obviously in the 1920s it was a resurgence of the KKK, and they saw that they could have better dues, more members if they expand that circle of hate that they're in. So instead of just hating blacks, they were like, we're going to hate Jews. We're going to hate immigrants. Of course, got to hate immigrants. And they saw JFK as an Irish Catholic immigrant. Yeah. That him and his people came over on the boat and they're ruining the United States, and we got to keep him out of the White House. That's the last thing we need. Yeah. And as you point out in the book, Catholic is, code word for immigrant at that time as well. That is how they see it. I mean, and again, things change, things don't change, right? I mean, that is the code they do not want. JFK is the second person to run for the presidency who's Catholic, but really the only one who has a real shot. Yeah. And they don't want a Catholic in the White House. And when you put out that kind of venom and hatred, you can't be surprised when someone gets activated. No. And Richard Pavlik is activated. He thinks he's the good American who's going to stand up to these people. And boy, he's going to keep that Catholic JFK out of the White House. When you look at Pavlik on paper, it's, you think of the concept of a car bomber or a suicide bomber here in 2025, and it's not Richard Pavlik. He was born in the 1870s. He's 70, which is a crazy number, right? Crazy number. And it's 1960 and he's 73 years old and he is driving a 1950 Buick and he stuffs it full of dynamite, which back at the time you could just pick up wherever. Go buy right. We don't let people buy dynamite now. Right. After, not even, of course, because of what happened in Oklahoma City, but right. You don't want people to buy dynamite and blasting caps and things like that without reporting. But back then, he comes in, goes to the place, say, can I have a stick of dynamite? Buys it, comes back, gets another They finally say to him, "Hey, man, why are you buying all this dynamite?" And Pavlik says, "Well, I got to get rid of some tree stumps," which is what you can do with dynamite. Even to this day, you use it.
Yeah.
But the amount of dynamite that he bought 10 sticks, 7 that he had in his car, but you could explode an entire forest. Like there's no amount of tree stumps that this guy, and that's the amazing part is he oddly has other parts to him that are fascinating. Like the last thing he does before coming after JFK, you think like he's the early, the guy who's twirling his mustache and just a bad dude. But the last thing he does before he heads and signs that note and says, this is going to be the end of my line, he knows it's a suicide bombing, is he sells his house and he donates it to the kids' charity to help children. An actual kind, nice, beautiful act is his last act. And which is to me so appropriate for what JFK is and what Jackie is. And these people, we want to paint them with these huge, broad strokes, but they're complicated. They're more complicated than we paint them.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, the thing that ultimately stopped him from blowing up that dynamite was the presence of Jackie and Carolyn Kennedy, right? And he had a target of 1. And, back then, I guess terrorists, which is in effect what he was.
Oh, he is, of course.
Yeah. Cared about collateral damage. He didn't want to kill Jackie. He didn't want to kill Carolyn. He just wanted to kill John.
Had the hatred for JFK.
Yeah. And another fascinating thing about this story is, this initial, would you call this a failure on the part of the Secret Service?
So I've worked with the Secret Service now for my novels, my thrillers, for the nonfiction books for over 20 years. And so 2 things about the service. So one thing, when you ask the Secret Service about when they kind of profile these people who have tried to kill the president, they fall into 2 groups. There's hunters and there's howlers. And a howler makes a lot of noise and says, "I'm coming to kill you. I hate that president. I'm coming after you." But they rarely pull the trigger. A hunter is very different, though. A hunter rarely says a word. They're the quiet ones, but they're the ones who do take action. And if you look at the 4 men who have successfully killed presidents in the United States, from Abraham Lincoln to JFK, all 4 of them are hunters.
Mm-hmm.
And Richard Pavlik thinks he's a hunter, but he's got a bit of a howler in him, and again, winds up opening his big fat mouth and gets caught because of it as well at the end. But to answer your question about, and I set that up because the Secret Service are not stupid,
No.
right? And I was talking to a buddy who is a Marine yesterday, and when you fight in the military, whether you're in Iraq and Afghanistan or go to Vietnam or whatever, you're fighting against an enemy who you think has a certain type of tactic. And sure that everyone's tactics change and everyone wants to kind of do new things and surprise their own enemy. But there is still just general things that are going to happen in the fight, for the most part. Obviously, there's always the unexpected, but there are certain tactics that stay the same. With the Secret Service, there's no pattern. There's nothing to study. You're trying to play defense against one person who has their own idea. You've never met them before. You can't study them. You don't know where they're coming from, but they could be there any second. And so I say that simply to say it's one of the hardest jobs in law enforcement. You're trying to predict one person on the planet. It's different when you're predicting a battalion, or there's things and indicators, and ships have to move and things have to come. But when you have to find one person, it is the ultimate needle haystack situation.
And you have to be right all the time.
And you got to be right every time. And listen, do I think that mistakes are made, like in the recent Trump one? I mean, listen, there are clearly mistakes that were made that any Secret Service person will tell you we blew that one, right? That was it. There were just holes that shouldn't have been there. But this one, I don't know how you've stopped Pavlik. I mean, they literally turned the one-way street. When the Secret Service came in, let's just talk about what they're facing them. So,
and just to help set it up here, like this was a huge dynamic shift for the Secret Service, switching from Eisenhower to Kennedy. There are different types of people with very different types of ways of operating and needs. And the Secret Service was in the middle of adapting this not long after Kennedy is announced as the election's winner. So they're trying to figure things out on the fly.
That's right. And on the fly with, again, another completely unpredictable person, which is JFK himself, right? Eisenhower, just to look at that for a moment. Eisenhower was the kind of guy, he's a conservative guy from the 1950s. The schedule says you're going to walk off the plane and get in the car. He's like, I'm walking off the plane, and he gets in the car. JFK walks off the plane when they land in Palm Beach, and he sees that there's a crowd of people, and they're all waving at him from the fence. So he beelines for the fence because he wants to kiss babies and sign babies and do everything you do with babies. And the Secret Service is like, what do we do? And they're like, well, go protect him. And so they got to race to the fence and make sure he's not going to get grabbed by someone in the crowd. And he's not going to the car. He's not following the schedule. In fact, when they get to his house in Florida, they're trying to guard him in the backyard, and they're covered in sweat because they're in Florida sun. They're baking in their suits, and JFK walks up to him and is like, what size shirt are you? And the Secret Service guy tells him, and JFK goes in his house, comes out with one of his own shirts and puts it on the guy. And these guys have barely been guarding the president 24 hours, and they're already wearing his clothes. So this is not your dad's president, and they're now trying to adapt to that. And now they get to Florida, and again, they're used to Eisenhower has his place, and then we guard northeast, south, and west, and we're covered. That's the job. But they get to Florida, they don't have presidents with multiple estates. Here we are in Massachusetts, here we are in Florida. We've got stuff he's got a Georgetown home, and then we got to make sure we, of course, don't forget the White House itself. And they take his estate is like it's basically down this long road that, imagine a letter T. And the top of the T is where the estate is, and the bottom of the T is a one-way road that runs right toward the mansion.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, well, we can't have cars coming down that road and barreling through the gates, so we'll take this road and we'll make it run one way the other way. So any car that's come the other way we know is a problem. Okay, that's good. And we could put, sentries over here and over here. So anyone that's coming down these sides, we got them. We got that covered. Great. Let's look at the backyard, folks. And the backyard is the ocean. And they're like, he has a beautiful piece of property, $1 million property that's on the Atlantic Ocean. And good luck with guarding that. I mean, any small person in an inner tube can come up, and you're not going to see them, rising like it's Red October. You're guarding against one person swimming on the beach and then walking a couple miles even. So it's a whole new game for them. And they're like everyone else, they're doing their best. Yeah. Now, when you miss it, is it a disaster? Of course it is. But that doesn't mean it's all, equally preventable.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out how Pavlik got his car that close to Kennedy's car. And I think that's the single
and listen,
point of
the Secret
there.
Service at the time, the head of the Secret Service at the time says this is the closest anyone has come on his watch to killing a sitting president.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe two things. I believe, one, it's really hard, like I said, but two, it's been a while since a president has died in office. And I know that that's silly, but there is that, after JFK, I mean, we're all focused on the assassins, right? It just becomes part of the culture.
Yeah.
But until JFK is killed, it's been a while, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like Eisenhower had, and everyone has like these close calls, but no one has successfully done it in so long. Yeah. And not that makes them easier or lazier, or all the assumptions that we quickly want to pile on the Secret Service. But, I think there was as things jumped forward in technology and the access to a presidency, it goes in crazy waves over time. You used to go talk to the president at the White House. In Abraham Lincoln's times, you'd drive your car up to the White House, you'd park it, you'd walk inside, sit in a waiting room, and then talk to the president because you were a citizen who wanted to talk to the president.
Mm-hmm.
And now look at the White House. I mean, anyone who's been down there, I remember even before 9/11, you could drive along the main road on Pennsylvania Avenue. You can't do that anymore,
no.
Right? After 9/11, they stopped all that. I have in my house the blueprints for the White House. They used to, pre-9/11, they used to pay $5 from the Park Service, and they would send them to you, anyone who wanted them. Oh, you want them? Here are the blueprints to the house. I have a copy. 9/11 happened. Guess what? You can't get those anymore. And so the world kind of slowly changes around the presidency. And I think that was happening, obviously, at a time when they're trying to put these barriers up, and JFK is trying to tug them down at the same time because he wants to be accessible and he doesn't want to be behind a fence.
Yeah. Yeah. And the man, I guess the family that you paint so elegant a portrait of in this book, it really, really comes to life too, and that change that he represents, and not just him, but Jackie. Like the story that you wrote, it's about JFK, it's about Richard Pavlik, but also to me, after I put the book down, like that was really in some ways a book about Jackie and the life that she led, and this bubble that she was thrust into with Clint Hill, and as again someone who is a bit of a JFK 1963 assassination nerd, like when I first saw Clint Hill's name in your book, I'm like, hey, I had no idea he was on her detail that early, and like they had such a close relationship, and your book gives us a view, I think, of a presidency in a family dynamic, in the way they live with the Secret Service that few really a glimpse that we don't really get, and but when it comes to Jackie. Sorry, I'm kind of recalling this reading experience I just had in real time and how beautiful it was.
I love that. No, it's great.
Yeah.
No, but you're hitting it on the head for us. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Josh and I, we very quickly concluded that what we do with the Kennedys, especially the Kennedys,
Mm-hmm.
is we reduce them to the most easy, stupid cliches.
Yeah.
Jackie, we say, oh, she's beautiful and she's got grace and she's got style. And JFK, we say, oh, he's so handsome and he was full of hope. And neither of them are just that. It's just saying like Dan's a nice guy, or, like it's one part, but there's millions of slivers, millions of different things in that kind of complex knitted together thing that we all are. And we were looking for the humanity under them. And Jackie absolutely is the breakout star of this book. She's the most fascinating thing because you haven't seen her like that. And we hadn't seen her like that. And we don't hold back on her, right? We document the affairs that JFK has on her.
Yes.
That after they get engaged, one of JFK's best friends goes up to her and says, Jack really does like women. And says to her face, he's going to keep cheating on you.
Yeah, and she took it as a challenge at the time.
Right. She's like, oh, I got there. Same thing, right? The struggle matters for her.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's like, I can handle this. And when she goes into labor, I mean, there's a couple times when you'll see in the book, but one of them, she goes into labor, she's hemorrhaging. JFK's nowhere to be found. He's on a plane headed to Florida. At one point, he's at a boat with a bunch of other women. I mean, it's a disaster. And the whole time that we were working on it, I kept saying, where's Camelot? Like, when do we start calling it Camelot? Because is it 61, 62, early in 60? Where does Camelot come in? And what we finally discovered is that Camelot doesn't get started to be used as a phrase until after JFK actually dies.
I didn't know that until I read that, yeah.
And it's after the assassination that Jackie grants one interview to Life magazine. And she has this reporter come to her house. He's there until I think after midnight, and she's rewriting the interview with him. One interview. And she tells this exclusive story to him. She says that when JFK was in a lot of pain in the White House when he was alive and his back was hurting him and he couldn't fall asleep at night, now one of the things that she would do to kind of calm him down was she would, and to ease his pain, put on a record of one of his favorite songs, one of his favorite plays about a place called Camelot. And she's the one who puts that word into the lexicon. And, you forget that Jackie used to be a reporter herself. So she was a member of the press. She was hounded by the press. But make no mistake, she's a master of the press. And she's the one who wants to write JFK's legacy before anyone else can. And she's so savvy and so sharp and so smart. And we were like, we have to tell this side of the story because obviously it leads to the conclusion on why he lives. Her part of it is so vital. But it just wound up revealing this humanity that we never see with the cliches we've turned the Kennedys into.
One thing that really jumped out to me as you're describing Jackie in the book is to me, there was a profound sense of loneliness came across.
100%.
And, that was really affecting, because you're right. I mean, she wasn't new to Washington, D.C. At that point. She was a reporter there. In some ways, she was a creature of D.C. She met JFK. She met John there when he was a congressman. But when they're finally married and, you take us into their home in Georgetown as he's getting ready to assume the presidency, I've lived in DC before, so I kind of had, this pretty vividly in my head. The only place that she could really, she was a solid person. She was a private person naturally. She didn't want the attention, but you painted this picture of the only place that she could really have that chosen solitude was on a canal near the Potomac that no one really walked, in a heavily wooded, serene. And I have in my head, I think I almost know exactly what you're talking about. I may have happened upon there, randomly by myself, but if it wasn't that one, I know it. And
no, but let's talk about that. That's a beautiful. It's one of my favorite moments of the whole book. Is you have the great Clint Hill, who him and Lisa McCubbin. Full credit to them. Their account of the moments are. We obviously tell so many stories from there, and we end the book with the real assassination of JFK from Jackie's perspective, and it's thanks to Clint Hill and that we get to see that view. But when Clint Hill first gets assigned, and he's going to be going to the White House, he's so excited, right? JFK wins, and they're like, "You're going to the White House." He's getting on, Presidential Protective Detail. PPD is the number one thing when you're in the Secret Service. Most people, they don't want to do counterfeiting; they want to protect the president. He's like, "I made it." And they're like, "Well, good news, bad news. Good news is you're going to the White House. The thing is you're not protecting the president. You've been assigned to the first lady." And he thinks that that's the word, like it's a demotion. He's like, "What do you mean? Like I'm going to be guarding like tea parties?" And he has no idea that he's going to be dealing with Jackie Kennedy, like the great one herself. And when he first, no one knows to this day why they assign him. They think because he has young kids and she has young kids and one on the way, that she has Carolyn and one on the way. And in the beginning, like you said, she goes in these long walks. It's the one place where she can just kind of gather her thoughts. And Clint Hill is, 50 feet behind her. And then he's 25 feet behind her on the next walk. And then on the next one, a couple of weeks later, he's 10 feet behind her. And then eventually she asks him a question. And you slowly watch this beautiful, really wonderful relationship develop as he just is really caring for her and feels like, she's locked in this cage that she never wants to be in on any level. She's a private person and has been thrown into the mix. And we all know that the more someone doesn't want the attention, the more enigmatic they become. Yeah. So the whole world is now obsessed with her. JFK, when he goes over to, I think it's Europe, introduces himself by saying, "Some of you might know me. I'm Jackie's husband." I mean, the guy's the president of the United States and the crowds are there for Jackie. They don't even care about him. They want to meet her. And the only person she can really trust is Clint Hill, her Secret Service agent. In fact, when she hemorrhages and races to the hospital and JFK is nowhere to be found, the first person who gets there with they contact is Clint Hill. Yeah. He's the one that jumps out of his clothes and, and races to the hospital to take care of her, make sure she's okay. And again, it's just, it's so perfect. And because you can feel how hard it is. And all we do with our presidents is want to tell some simplified story about how great it is, especially with the Kennedys. Yeah.
And JFK I think was rarely there. I mean, whether it was through official business or personal business, maybe he was off, we knew he was off cheating on her a lot.
And that's the guy.
And she knew it
too.
And,
and we tell the story like, JFK is this amazing World War II hero, right? We show in the beginning of the book that in World War II, he saves his he's on a PT-109, a Japanese destroyer. It smashes it to bits. 2 men die. One of them's unconscious. They're like, "How do we get him? We got to save his life and swim to a nearby island." JFK says, "Put him on my back. I'm the best swimmer." And he swims like miles to the island. When they get to the island, for days, they're like, "There's nobody here. We're going to die here. Let me go see if I can find another nearby island that might get us food or water or something." So he leaves and JFK swims to another island, finds a newer, bigger island that they think is easier to be spotted by people who might be overhead looking for them, swims back. Again, no food. It's got nothing. Swims back. And they're like, "We got to go to this other island, guys." And he says, "What about the unconscious guy? Put him on my back again." And they fashion this, kind of floating wood thing. And they put rope around them. And then JFK puts the rope in his own teeth, puts the man on his back and swims for another couple miles, saves his life. And when it's all done, JFK can easily be discharged from World War II. He's a hero. He's won the medals. He's got the stuff. Go home. His dad's like, "Come home, son. We're going to run you for Congress. You're a hero now." And JFK says, "No, Dad. The Nazis aren't beaten. The Japanese aren't beaten. When the fight's not done, I'm going back, and goes back into World War II and fights some more. So is JFK this amazing guy who saves the day and risks his life and saves his men and gives us a moonshot that takes us off Earth to the moon and gives us all this hope? Or is he completely like the most reckless, terrible husband cheating on his wife? Is he good? Is he bad? Or is he like all of us, like a little bit of both?
Yeah, and we want our hero simple, right? Like when he came out of World War II, the myth was already being made, again, partly by Joe Kennedy, mainly by Joe Kennedy. And
sure.
He slid into Congress, and he was a hero. Everything you just described, what he did at PT 109 and in the Pacific was amazing. But like all of us, we all have different sides, and we all have secret parts of ourselves we don't want anyone else knowing. Or in JFK's case, we have secret parts of ourselves we don't care that other people know.
Right? He doesn't care. He doesn't even care. I mean, and at the end of the day, I think that so many books will tell you, that's why he's bad.
Yeah.
This is why he's good. And to me, I think we have to do a better job as storytellers, as humans, with each other, that everybody's got it. I've been writing in our nonfiction kids book series. I've done 38 heroes at this point.
You know all about heroes, yeah.
Right. And that's why I make my living talking about heroes. And there's not a person that I've written about that doesn't have something that is actually also completely embarrassing and bad. But we are not, as someone once far wiser than me said, we are never who we are on the worst day of our life. And we have to stop expecting that from everybody, and holding you up as perfection is the only way we can love you too. And I think, as long as we're willing to kind of crucify each other for any, and listen, there are bright lines, right? There are things you can't do and things you shouldn't do and you should be judged by, of course. But I feel like, to me, the beauty of the JFK Conspiracy as a book, I hope is yes, you get and watch this plot to murder him, but I hope you see Jackie and JFK in ways you've never seen them. Because I think, and let me say it this way, JFK and Jackie are our first celebrity president and first lady. And we've been in an odd, and I don't mean famous, because, Abraham Lincoln's famous and lots of people are famous, but celebrity meaning that Hollywood way, right? They've got money and they've got fame and beauty and houses. And I think for decades we've been chasing that. The Reagans were like that. For some of the Obamas were like that. For others, the Trumps are like that.
Yeah.
But it's a completely hollow pursuit to chase that, because, as you were saying, like, Camelot didn't exist. It's not real.
Yeah.
And the pursuit of fame and money is, of course, nonsense. That's ridiculous to chase. But as a culture, we chase it. And I wish what we did is we chased the thing that JFK was actually great at, which was hope.
Yeah.
He did give us hope. He did, in his moment of, the country, half the country hates him, but he gets in that inaugural address and says, "We bring us together. We're all in this together."
He had a 70% approval rating. Well, according to some polls, but by the end, I believe.
But now they did a I think it was Gallup did an assessment of every president since 1960. JFK, of course, is number one in approval rating. His approval rating is 90%. No one's even close. He's 20% higher than whoever's next.
Yeah.
Nobody. And listen, when you shoot someone in the head, everyone becomes a hero. I get it, right? Of course they do. Anyone who's been to a funeral knows everyone who's dead becomes a martyr, right? But I will say that hope that he unleashes in that inaugural address is real. He's riding that. That's what he's riding in his presidency. And that is something that's worth pursuing. That is what's wrong in the culture right now. Because look at us, man. Look at what we are and what we think of our country right now. How many people just, we need that hope so badly.
Yeah, and I think that 90% approval rating, hindsight, is a reflection of the image of what he represents and what could have happened, rather than necessarily.
Well, that's what that's the wise thing, right? Right, Dan, is that it's not that Camelot doesn't exist or does exist. We want it to exist.
Mm-hmm.
It is an aspiration for us as Americans that this beautiful place and this wonderful family and happiness is available. And whether it did or didn't exist is not important. To me, what is important is we do wish we could have it like that. And to
it
me,
can
without some hope,
exist.
you're never going to get there.
Yeah, I mean, it can. It can.
Of course.
And again, get the book. It's a gripping narrative. Actually, Brad also has a book with a very similar plot, which I'd love to talk to you about a different time, about Abraham Lincoln. He was almost assassinated on the way to his inauguration. But you have more coming out that's nonfiction. And tell me about it. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, so let's talk actually. So what's out so far? This is the fourth in our conspiracy series. We started with the first conspiracy about a secret plot to kill George Washington during the Revolutionary War. When George Washington found out about it, he gathered up those who were responsible, built a gallows, and then he hanged the person responsible in front of 20,000 people. It was the largest public execution at that point in North American history. George Washington brought the hammer down, was like, "Do not mess with me. I'm George Washington. I'm going to be on the money one day." It's actually a direct quote. But that was the first conspiracy. The Lincoln conspiracy you mentioned. Yeah. The Lincoln conspiracy is about a plot to kill him before he gets to, long before John Wilkes Booth. We did the Nazi conspiracy about a secret plot to kill FDR, Stalin, and Churchill at the height of World War II, which I love, and the JFK conspiracy is the fourth one. And then after that, we have coming up in our kids book series. I do, these are obviously all for adults, but in our kids book series, we've done I Am Abraham Lincoln, I Am Rosa Parks, I Am Amelia Earhart, I Am George Washington. We do books of kind of illustrated kids books to give kids better heroes to look up to. And we're doing I Am Sally Ride is about to come out.
Cool.
Then, and We Are the Beatles is about to come out. So those are our next two kids books, and those are fun. And then the last one coming out in March, you started this by saying that I did a commencement address. And for those who don't know, last year I gave the commencement address at the University of Michigan, which was really meaningful to me because my son was graduating Michigan that year. So 70,000 people in a giant stadium, but I cared about one, my son. And my speech was all about magic. That when you speak to, magic we know doesn't exist, but there are things you can't explain. And to me, that's what magic is. But when you talk to magicians, they'll tell you there are only 4 types of magic tricks that are real. There's 1, you make something appear. 2, you make something disappear. 3, you take 2 things and you make them switch places. And 4 is you take one thing and you turn it into something else. And that's the hardest trick of all, which is transformation. Yeah. And the whole speech is about those 4 magic tricks and what you need to make appear as yourself. And you got to make your fear disappear. And I got to the third point about how to make 2 things switch places. And I started talking about empathy, because that's what empathy is, right? It's switching places with someone else and looking through their eyes. And the crowd reacted in a way I wasn't prepared for. And just, I said to myself as I was giving the speech, what just happened there? Why were they screaming for that? And my wife said, you tapped into a vein you didn't know was there. And when the speech was done, all these people around the country kept writing to me and saying, can I have the text to your speech? I want to give it to my kids. Can I have the text to your speech? I want to give it to my grandkids, my nieces, my nephews. They tracked down my sister who lives in another state. And they were like, hey, that guy gave that speech. Can you get the text? I mean, I've been doing this for over 25 years. No one's ever asked for the text of anything I've said. But boy, they wanted the speech. And so we're coming out with Make Magic, a little book of inspiration you didn't know you needed. And it comes out.
Yeah, that's a very powerful moment when you watch it. And you can watch that speech on YouTube. And just to put it sort of in a time and place, it was last year. It was during graduation season. We're in the middle of 2024. We're in the middle of this election campaign. Everyone knows what's happened over the last few years, and the message of empathy, seeing it resonate like it did in Michigan. Where there are it's a very divided place as well. That was a really nice thing to see. Nice moment as a viewer. The thing
that was amazing that you can't see, and I'll leave you with this is. Yeah. It was a disaster when I was there because it was also the time of protesting. And again, more power to protesters, do your thing. Yeah. But they were disrupting the graduation. So I didn't know if I was going to be able to get the words out. No one knew what was going to happen. And you can't see this on the video, but 8 minutes before I go on, the protesters are like halfway down the field. Have nothing to do with me. They're protesting, all the stuff about the school. Yeah. And 8 minutes before I go on, they push the protesters back and give them their own spot to protest in the end zone. So now they're 80 yards away from me. The clouds up above part and the sun comes out. 8 minutes before I go on, my sister takes a picture of the sun coming through the clouds, texts me on stage and says, Mom and Dad are looking out for you right now. And 8 minutes before I go up to speak, I really did feel like my parents were looking out for me. And I got to give the speech of my life to my son. And that was one of the great moments of my life, is to be able to write something for your child and deliver it in that manner. And again, make magic is truly my belief about the universe, my best advice for it. So if you're looking for anyone who's graduating this year, that comes out on March 4th, I think.
Is it available for pre-order now?
You can pre-order right now. Yep, available.
Go get it,
it's up there. Go get it. It's one of my favorite things I've ever written.
Brad, thanks again. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Enjoyed our conversation a lot.
Thanks, Dan.